Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the next and new episode of our Data Legends podcast today. I am Courtney Pilata. I lead the marketing team at ChaosSearch, and today I am joined by my colleague and one of our co-founders and chief architect of our cloud data platform, David Noblet. David, thanks for making time to join us today.
Oh, thanks for having me here.
David and I were just talking about we've had all sorts of guests on our podcast as of late, but we haven't had the opportunity to talk about what it's like to build disruptive technology in the way that both David and I work at Chaos Search every day. So today we're going to feature the ins and outs of what it looks like to both build, motivate, inspire a team in a fast growing startup environment. And then, what disruption really looks like when you think about building technology. So, David, thanks for joining us. And we'll start with the first question, which is, as a co-founder and the chief architect at Chaos Search, what have you found to be most helpful and useful to you as you think about trying to motivate teams in a pretty high pressure environment?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a bit of a recipe to motivation and leading teams. And to be honest, it really starts with the team itself. I think, right? So more than anything, I mean, we work with very hard technology. It's a startup environment. You're working long hours. It's not quite round the clock, but it is for some. Um, and so you have to start with people who just really have a passion for the base general subject matter to begin with, and that serves as something that you can use to build off of, to sort of even supercharge the team and get it really going. But I mean, the kinds of people that we have working here, really inquisitive people that you tell them any topic, and they're going a mile deep on it. We have sort of a coffee club here at Chaos Search, and we have some of the engineers like discussing like water chemistry and stuff like that for the coffee. I mean, this is the type of person that you want to serve as a base here. And most of these folks, they do these kinds of projects outside of work. I mean, you're starting with a person who's going to be doing this type of thing whether you tell them to or not, right? And then
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, that's not the end all. It's not to just say, hey, you just hire motivated people and then they're motivated, right? Like in a startup environment, like there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of like time pressure. There's a lot of things that may even like look like failures or setbacks or things like this. And so a lot of what I spend doing is like working directly with individual people and providing them context, right? To reframe like how things are. It's like, yeah, no, we did this. It didn't feel like a win here, but actually it is a win, because you're not making progress on just one vector at a time, right? And so progress is measured by kind of the sum of all the vectors that you're going after at any particular time. And when you're an engineer, heads down on work, it's hard to like take a step back sometimes and see that bigger picture. So I think that's another critical part to that motivation. It's sort of like removing the roadblocks and frustration, and keeping people aligned, saying, no, this, you're on the path, right? This is success, what you're doing here. And then that ties into their intrinsic passion for the subject matter, and people will just run. And then of course, like, an individual person doesn't just scale, right? Like you can do that to a few people. And so it's very important too to like connect with those team leads and other folks in leadership positions, to kind of bake that whole thing into the culture, so everyone is doing it, and you get this sort of drumbeat, right, of like alignment and like, let's go take that hill.
Yeah, enthusiasm. And this, your point is such a good one too, which is having passion for the topic. And I know you and I have talked about this before too, is not always, it's passion for the job they're going to do, but it's also being a thoughtful thinker. It sounds like people who are really curious about things like water makeup and coffee. It could also be passionate about coming into an environment where they know they have the opportunity to build something that's fundamentally disruptive. And the idea too, married to this idea of context, which is like you get that passion and people feel inspired and they, get to work. But then how are you constantly sort of checking that with, here's the impact, even when the impact isn't apparent? It's a really important combination of both like core skill sets that you need. I think about that in the context of marketing, right? And this reminder of not everything you try is going to be great, but it's a path on this journey and it could be used for something else, maybe not the thing you originally intended. And that keeps you feeling pretty inspired, or hopefully keeps you feeling pretty inspired.
Yep, and you wanna also tell people to not be afraid of this unknown. In this startup space, there's a lot of unknowns. Like it's almost a little bit like research, right? Where because you've started with this blank sheet of paper, right? And you're trying to do hopefully even something that no one else has done before, because that gives you a unique spot in the market. But with that comes this like uncertainty, like, am I doing the right thing? This is new, like you have nothing else to anchor on, and so having folks like be comfortable with that, that kind of positioning of their work and such is also quite important.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that balance is really important. But and if you think about it in the context of team members who are like this and they are, they're seeking to solve, let's say, great challenges, maybe a variety of types. How do you balance the need and energy around new ideas? You're building for X and then the team's thinking about how, oh, well, but we could do this or could do this. How do you balance new ideas with, I'll call it like keeping the engine running, so that you're innovating but executing at the same time?
Yeah. So I mean, this is an interesting thing because it's sometimes it's framed like an either or. In the best case scenarios, actually you're taking one part product vision, one part concrete customer requirements, and you're actually triangulating and trying to find common bits of infrastructure that actually move the ball forward on both vectors, right? So maybe you have a customer requirement and you're like, oh wait, actually I can take like 50, 60, 80% of that customer requirement, some base of that, and actually apply it to some product vision thing, and where you're not bringing the product vision thing all the way to fruition, right? But you're able to like get that commonality, and so it's not so much an either or all the time. Sometimes it's a both. I'm gonna take this common base and I'm gonna use it to push things forward.
Yeah, I think about that in the context of something you shared earlier this week that we won't go into the detail of here, but it ended up being that you were solving for something a single customer needed. And we all realized this is going to be extraordinarily powerful for anybody new that we're bringing onto the platform. And it's a win-win.
Yep. Yeah. So ideally you get the win-wins, and when that's not possible, it's just the hard work of really digging into those customer requirements and saying, okay, like what's the real minimum part that you need to like get to solve their problems without like distracting from the core mission you're trying to do. Or maybe you even, if you're getting a lot of that, maybe you need to take a step back and say, hey, are my customers and core vision aligned? And at that point, don't be afraid to question those premises, right?
Yeah, right. It's like exactly part of the learning. Sometimes you find those things are very well aligned, and sometimes you, not to say happily, but
and it could move you in either,
in a good way, you learn that things need to change,
and
that's
move you
as
in either
important,
direction. You could either say, hey, wait a minute, we have tons of customers, they're really excited about this, I never thought about it, let's move more in that direction. Or you could say we're getting like this spattering of one-off little customer requirements, but we really think the product should go here, and we'll fish in better waters, right? They're definitely both things.
Yeah, and be open, like keeping an open mind to say, hey, we can make a change that could better serve the needs of our customers, and being able to be flexible like that is important. So yeah, no, I like that. You're very right. It's not an either or. It can be really both. Well, so to that end, let's think about, I'm sure you work and have a network full of people who are like you. You're leading teams, you're building products. And if you think about even beyond ChaosSearch, what is something you think that everybody, we don't say everybody because it's not everybody, people should start doing? Like something that maybe you've learned that you think, absolutely, I want to see more teams do this.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe I'll use an example because I think it's something I probably could have done better even earlier on, right? So, I think it's very important to pay very close attention to how much progress you're making across different parts of the organization, even if it's just like within engineering, right? You think of things like product and QA and operations, and even hiring the team so you have resources, right? You ever like change a wheel on a car, right? And you're tightening the nuts in that star pattern, right? You want to do this with your organization and pay very close attention, because if you make too much progress, like you think progress is good, right? But it's not. It's actually not universally good, right? If you like push the product really far, and maybe your like operations team is rocking it, QA is doing great, all of a sudden actually you're maybe very successful, but if you didn't hire a team to back it, how are you going to support all your customers? You're going to have like a resourcing problem. So that success, what maybe should be success, is now actually a detriment to you, and will cause problems. And so like being like keeping really on top of that and being very incremental about it, just like take a step. Where are we? What's the thing poking up? Tap it down a little bit. Take a step, look around. What's the next thing? Tap it down a little bit. I think that tends to lead to a stronger organization and more overall success.
Yeah, I can absolutely appreciate that. This need to, you're running, but you have to run across multiple vectors in some level of a parallel fashion so that you don't find yourselves surprised. And you could think about that. I mean, in the marketing world, you can think about that about any singular program. I could put 15 programs out the door tomorrow, but if the team that supports the follow up on any of those programs is 110% maxed out, it's for naught. So it's pragmatically trying to manage progress. That makes a lot of sense. And what about something you think people should stop doing?
I think
What's a thing of the
it almost
past?
dovetails with the other one. It's
Could
like stop trying to start at the end. I get this.
yes, that it has to look like this.
Yeah, so
Right,
I,
right,
I
right,
mean
right.
that's
Okay.
good for vision, right? That's a good North Star. You want that, but I think sometimes people come in and they sort of mistake that North Star for what they should do next, and it's really just like you keep the North Star in your vision, and you have that as alignment, right? But then you say, it's not that. Yeah, sure. Like I'll give you an example from early on in the company, right? So, um, very very early on, we're trying to engage with the very very first like alpha prospects of customers, start getting the hang of doing like getting feedback from folks, this and that. And we had like barely put together some of our deployment infrastructure to be able to like support doing this and actually bring on someone external, just like early days, years and years ago, right? And I remember like I was working very very hard to get the first one up. It took me probably all night because I had to do a lot of stuff by hand, and there was a lot of pressure, right, to like start getting this feedback, which is why we're like doing it at that time. And so I finally get the thing up. We bring the first person on, and the sort of feedback I got internally next is, okay, like let's have 50 of these. We should have push button deployments. And of course we should have push button deployments. I wanted if I could just snap my fingers and have push button deployments, I would have had that. Of course it's something we want, but you have to work there, and you have to do it in the context of like what are your immediate goals. And so I still think it was a good move to engage with those prospects early on, and it was worth my time to spend that whole evening like setting up that deployment. But at the same time, it's not to say I didn't think about push button deployments or want that. Of course I want that, but there's just this tendency to have people come in and sort of think like this sort of start at the end.
Yeah,
We'd
that
we'd
like,
call
of
them
course
end
we
ups
need
instead of
this. Let's
startups.
just do that. Right. And then all of a sudden you do something like that, like a push button deployment, the expense of so many other pieces of functionality that it ends up being a real challenge. It's a really good example. I mean, certainly I can see that even when we think about self-service for us. Like, you're like, oh, let's just, we can send people to self-service. Then you get in there and you're like, well, there's a great variety in the complexity of questions that people want to ask. And is the best idea for us to just send people off on their own inside the platform, or can we do that in a more guided way? So you kind of have to say, like, we'd like to get somewhere over here. Where do you start? So
Yeah, and you have to be very, very like purposeful about those immediate next steps, and kind of goes back to what I was talking about before, where you're like, you take one step and then survey, like, what is the next best step now? Maybe it's not even what you thought. When you're three steps down the line, maybe it's not quite the same thing you thought the three steps prior, like as to what exactly the next best step to make is, right?
now that next best step, oh my gosh, talk about words to live by, particularly in a startup. The amount of time spent trying to figure out what you should do when something changes, and the realization that you really just have to think through what is the next best step. It's just, it is so often the case that that's where you're at. And a problem could seem like, well, we could make these 16 changes, but the reality is, what is the one thing that we
Yeah,
can do that's our next best step to
yeah,
make
and really
progress? And
crystallizing.
oftentimes that is real execution.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So, well, awesome. No, that's very helpful, and hopefully resonates with a bunch of our listeners here. But let's think about it, when you think about outside of Chaos Search, when you think about other companies who have really disrupted the space when it comes to data or analytics or infrastructure, who really do you believe are good examples of having achieved technically and really delivered on the promise of their vision?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, it's almost hard not just to mention AWS and what they've done with S3. I mean, it's become so disruptive that it's now pervasive. I mean, to the point where it's kind of air for some for some companies, and our whole product, of course, is built on top of that, and it's one of the best, most reliable, most performant products I've ever used. I'm very, very, very impressed. I think it really hit home for me, actually, even back in 2017. They probably won't like me mentioning it, but it was that big outage that they had back then.
Right. The infamous outage. Yes.
Yeah, and we were like we were pretty early on back then, and we were doing some development. It really even surprised us that it had gone down. But then you look at it, and the whole internet was down. Like,
Right. It was
so
everybody.
much is running
Yes.
off of that one service that you really are taking it for granted. And they have a simple interface. They've added features and stuff, but it's been pretty stable, even since we started, in terms of what they've offered. And they just do it well, and do it at scale, and do it reliably.
Well, and I think it speaks volumes to the fact that, I mean, we as a company we've built an entirely new approach. We've delivered on an entirely new approach based on the power of S3, knowing that behavior has changed so fundamentally for our own customers around really trusting S3 for so much of their data, that there's a tremendous opportunity to make that even more available to them. So yeah, I mean, we see it and live it every day. I like your analogy that for some it's like air. I think that for sure that is become really a truth. And with some of these other cloud platforms too, but S3 is the first, and it has been so widely accepted. Uh, yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. Well, then what about beyond companies or products that inspire you? How do you get better? What are the sources you kind of trust to self-educate? To Are there channels, groups of people that you would consider inspiring and integral to you continuing to uh, expand your own skill set and scope?
I mean, I would say I constantly get inspiration from my own team. I mean, we have this culture. I mentioned it to before, like the folks, bantering about water chemistry for coffee, and all sorts of things. I get technical bits and bobs. Sometimes it's just in the form of like crazy off the wall brainstorming that has nothing really to do with, hey, what about this interesting garbage collector? What if we did this different, because I was reading about this, or maybe it's specifically work related, and really, really diving deep on a particular thing. Say, hey, maybe we should use this or that, and this is a constant source of like threads to pull on. And then of course for me, it's like, okay, in the evenings, I just Google around while I'm watching TV or something, pull on those threads and start. Okay, oh, that's interesting. And so was talking about this, and you just spend a little bit of time each day, kind of like digging deep there, and it really does it really does like come back into the product for me too, right? So I you know I we don't really talk about it externally so much, but our query infrastructure is this sort of three tiered thing, which is actually modeled after modern compiler design, where there's this like front end, intermediate representation, and then back end layers. Like a big part of the power of our architecture, right, is that our query infrastructure has this intermediate, generic intermediate layer, and we can put other query front ends on top of it. Of course, we've gone to market with the Elasticsearch front end, but we're working to add SQL functionality, and those are actually two different front ends that feed into the same common infrastructure. And that whole idea actually is something that already exists in other places, and compiler design is one of those places.
Yeah, so it is just like looking at an idea and concept and starting to try to think about how it could even apply to how you do things, how we ultimately do things. That door is always open. Being inspired by your team, though, is just one of those. It's a group of people you spend a tremendous amount of time with, and just a couple of ideas. I always think about things I hear about that I know nothing about. I gotta look that up. I don't know. Let's think about that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
you just
No,
you
no. And
learn
if you
something new.
and when you build this sort of dynamic, inquisitive team like that, you're just getting it all the time. Like you're living in that type of environment where you get that like multiple times a day. You get those. Oh, I should look. Oh, that is interesting. I should go research that a little more.
Yeah, right. I mean, the way that this world is changing so quickly when it comes to technology development, but also anything in our world, go to market tactics. There are so many opportunities for continuous improvement. Just having your eyes and ears out there is good. Well, let's conclude with just a little bit of a discussion around. I mean, you are one of the earliest members of this team. This is your company. What do you believe is one of your most favorite aspects about the Chaos Search culture? And maybe something that you've seen since day one to you know day now that you feel like is really tried and true of the culture itself.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before. Internally, we have something of a we culture. It's a really team based culture where folks are really happy to dive in and like help other people achieve things that they're trying to get done. And you pair this with this like sort of can do attitude, and this like very inquisitive environment. It really is. I mean, exciting for me personally to be in that type of in that type of environment.
Yeah, no, the we culture is it's so important. I say it. I live in Denver, and for our listeners, we some of us are in the office, some are not in the office. But a we culture is particularly important when you're working across a distributed team, right? How do you help each other even when you're not sitting right next to each other every single day? And when you believe that it's this collaboration of effort that helps drive success, everybody starts to think that way. It just makes it easier to make progress. Um, so no, absolutely resonates. And last question for fun, besides you and your team running half marathons over the weekend in a lot of rain, what if you were gonna, if you were gonna write a book, okay, whether about anything, could be what you do all day, could be what you do in your spare time. What would you write about? What are you passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a hobbyist at heart. I do a lot of like where I used to do a lot of beer brewing. This was something that I used to spend a lot of time on. I would have like a beer. They kind of overlap. You'd have a beer going each weekend. But you sort of pipeline it and bottle. I think I could even have just writing books be a hobby. Like it's the type of thing that I think I'm the type of person that can really get into any number of different topics and just kind of go deep and research and just kind of lose myself in it. But these days it tends to be more losing myself in the mechanics of of building Chaos Search.
Yeah, no, a hobbyist at heart is a good statement. It's like you're building when you're at work every day. You're building when you're brewing. You're wanting to try new things and experiment. It's I think everybody here can appreciate that. Sometimes that's focused on one hobby that you have lots of time for. Sometimes that's focused on what might be your work, even though your work may also feel like it's a passion. It's a hobby. That's what everybody hopes for. So well, that's awesome. Well, David, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And for our listeners, hopefully you found this helpful, and we look forward to continuing to bring new topics to the Data Legends podcast. But what a treat to be able to have my colleague and our founder sitting here talking about what we're doing differently at Chaos Search. So thanks very much, David, for the time.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me.